Hey everybody, I just want to make a quick video talking about documenting your code and just making your code really pretty and also just knowing when to use comments and stuff. In this video, we're going to be talking about PEP 8 standards. That's PEP 8, the number 8. PEP 8 standards, not Pepe standards. That would be funny though. And in this video, I want to go through my NatureBot. We're not going to go through the whole code because, it's not really relevant, the actual entire code, but I want to use it as examples to show you. So, just as a quick itinerary to-do list here, we're going to talk about comments, doc strings, PEP 8 standards, and also type hinting as well, and just when to use all these things. So, as you can see here, let's talk about type hinting because I think that's the easiest thing. Oh, I also want to talk about variable names and function names and class names, but we'll talk about that in a second. So, type hinting is this, where you basically just you type your parameter name and then you put a colon and then you put what kind of variable it is. In this case, it's a list, so I also put what's in the list. So this is a list of strings, right? Now, what this word does is it looks at the database to see what bad words we have, and then it does a list comprehension to form a list of all the bad words that are in the current list of words that it gave originally. And so it's basically comparing two lists, and if it finds any matches, it will return that. And yeah. So, well, not this particular line. This is just forming a list, a one-dimensional list from the bad words database because the database returns a list of tuples, and we don't really care about the tuples. In this case, we just want a nice clean list of bad words, so we can do list comprehension. This is where it actually does the list comprehension, and we're using the any keyword here, the any function here, so that we can say, is there any word in the sentence that there is a word in the bad words list? So it's going to look for every single word in that list of words, and it's going to check, is that word in the bad word list? No. Is that word in the bad word list? No. And as long as all those are no, if there's any word at all in the bad words list that's in that sentence, it will return false. If this returns false, then no bad words is false, which means there are bad words. So, yeah. Anyway, so I want to direct your attention to this particular part though, because this is called type hinting. So without this, if I cut this part out, right there, if I were to just like cut this part out of my code, this works fine, but when you're actually running the function, you don't know what to pass in here. Like, you don't really know specifically, like, what do I pass in? Do I pass in a string? Does it want a list of string? Like, how would you know that I want a list to be passed in, you know? So in this case, that's what that's for. So now, when I am running this function, now if I go down here and I say no bad words, and I try to pass in something, you can see it's telling me right there, list of strings. So if I have a string, like let's say I have a string variable that just says like this is a string, and I want to check if there aren't any bad words in here. Well, this is a string, so I could just say string variable dot split, and then that works perfectly fine. And then now it's just going to say, it's going to be a list, and the list is going to say this is the first item, and the second item is, third item is a, fourth item is string, and that's going to be that. And so that's how I would know. Pretty straightforward, right? And that's the beauty of type hinting, and it's a really easy way to tell people what you want to pass into your function or classes or whatever without actually having to put a comment in your doc string or something. But yeah, so yeah, and this is actually a good example because I actually need to fix this doc string. But let's go ahead and talk about doc strings. So doc strings are these things. It's maybe hard to see with the color scheme. I don't know if I can make it better personally. Let's see. GitHub Dark. I think that one works better. It's a little brighter, maybe easier to tell. But anyway, so it's you put triple quotes and then you put a like a new line as the ideal format, and then you can do multi-line comments is basically what this is, and it's a documentation for your function. So now if someone runs help on my module, they will see the name of this function, and then they'll see what the description of it is, right? And so this is the description. And so yeah, so the param part is where you define what all your parameters are. In this case, I only have one parameter, and that's sentence. So I'm defining what sentence is. And actually, this is a good example to show you guys because I actually need to fix this. So in this description, first of all, let's just read what the description of the whole function says. It says, this will return true if there is no bad word. And I should say no bad word in the given sentence list of strings. And then I should really just make this all one line, and I should just say false otherwise, right? And there you go. And now it's all just one line. And then I would say on the next line, I would say the parameter, and this is where you say that parameter, and you put colon param space and the name of your parameter and then another colon, and this is where I describe that parameter, and I say this is any string that you wish to check for bad words in. Now I should be careful with my wording because this actually isn't a string, and that's not the best word to say. So this is any list of strings that you wish to check for bad words in. And that's probably good enough, honestly, because if I do any more than that, it's probably just redundant. Because I could type an extra hint there to say you should probably split your string into a list or whatever, but, you know, I think in all honesty, I really should just make this parameter a string and then just do, like, sentence.split at the top and then, you know, deal with that in the parameter. But I don't know, I personally, this code is for my own personal project and my own personal use. But I guess if I was working with more people, I might just make it a string. In that case, it might make it easier, but it's whatever. Anyway, so that's kind of besides the point, but it's my own personal thing, so it doesn't matter as much here. Also, I'm going to turn my microphone gain down just a tiny bit. I don't want to be clipping for you guys. I want to be a little bit quieter here. Okay, so all right, now the last part of this, which I actually didn't include here, which is good that I said this, you put a colon and then returns, or you could put return as you saw there. That's perfectly fine. I personally prefer returns because it's like you're saying it returns this, right? So yeah. Anyway, it's a kind of a personal preference thing, but I like saying returns. So returns is basically, you're basically saying what does the function return. Now, in this case, I already kind of like said this. So actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this as my return statement, and for the description of the function, I'm just going to say this function checks a list of strings to see if there is a bad word in the given list of strings. You could probably shorten that to be even more concise, but I just want to like really spell it all out for you guys so you can see what I mean as an example. Okay. By the way, you guys will have to forgive me. I'm still getting over COVID, so I probably sound disgusting, but it is what it is. Okay, so that's doc strings right here. That's a doc string, and you can remove some of these unnecessary lines. I wanted to space things out so you could really see it all. The quotes is where it ends, the triple quotes here, and the triple quotes here is the beginning, and this is like the body of your doc string. And this part is really just about the parameter and the return. This is your actual description of what the function is actually doing. And honestly, good code comments itself. You really don't need to comment every line of code. I don't need to add a comment here to say, like, this would be redundant to say, this for loop converts every word in the loop to be lowercase, right? That's ridiculous. I don't need to do that. So it's kind of pointless for me to do that. So I don't need to do this. And to be honest with you, I don't even know why I have this for loop in here because I probably should have just put it inside the any function as well. I think this is probably a bit redundant, but it is what it is. Anyway, we'll come back to this eventually. But anyway, so that's an example of a documented function. Now, what I want to do is I want to scroll down and I want to find where I put a comment somewhere. So some of these comments, I am actually going against my own, um, like advice here. But like I said, this is my own personal personal project. So if I was writing code for like an assignment or like for work purposes, I would be a little bit different with all of my comments. Like I think this comment's probably unnecessary and stuff, but it just shows growth. It shows that we grow over time. And a lot of this code I've written like months ago and almost a year ago, so it just shows growth over time that I've changed and how I write code now and stuff like that. But some things are just a sort of remnant of the past, really. So it's not maybe not the most up to date version of how I could explain things, but yeah. So this is a good example of a comment right here. So I want to show you a comment. So this is a comment where you put the little pound sign or hashtag or whatever you want to call it in your Zoomer lingo. And you put the pound sign here, the little number sign, and then you say, I said, make sure the file size is less than 4 megabytes. And then I put in parentheses, this is primarily for Facebook's posting limitations. The reason I put this comment is because it might not be clear to someone why I'm checking if the file size is less than 4,000. Now, if we go back to photo size here, you'll notice photo size is defined as when we use the get file size function. So let's scroll up, and I don't feel like looking through the entire thing, so let's just find where it is in the script. So it's up here. So if I look at this function here, get file size, let's see what it's doing. So the length is equal to the float of the request content length, and then it uses the request.get library, the request library, and then the .get method here with the URL passed in that you pass into the function, and we divide it by 1,000 because this number, before you divide it by 1,000, this number is just in bytes. So if you divide it by 1,000, you get to a kilobyte. So this is how many kilobytes it is. This length variable represents how many kilobytes the file is, because no file is going to be less than a kilobyte. Like no image. Trust me, when you're getting images from Pexels, no image is going to be less than a kilobyte. It literally has to be a certain resolution in order to even get on their website. So there's no point in getting the image in bytes. It's just too much numbers. It's too much data to store in a float. Like a float can handle that, but it's just pointless. So I go ahead and divide it by 1,000. Now you might be asking yourself, well, if you divide it by 1,000, then why are you dividing it? Like, why are you saying by 4,000 here? Why not just divide it by 1,000,000 and then just do by 4? Wouldn't that be easier to read? And to that I say yes, but it's really just a design choice. It really doesn't matter. In this particular instance, yes, I probably should have done 1,000,000 than just done 4 here, but I wanted it to be, a little more clear. And so I said, make sure the file size is less than 4 megabytes. And this is primarily because of the posting limit. So you can infer here 4 megabytes, 4,000. So you can infer that it's in kilobytes, but maybe I should be a little more clear. But this is kind of what I mean. But I do want you to look at this photo size. That's a pretty good file. Like that's a pretty good variable name. But I could make it even better by saying photo file size, and that would make it maybe even clearer to say what it is, because maybe because photo size could be referring to the resolution, it could be referring to the file size. There could be some like confusion there, so we can go in and we can actually refactor this file size or photo size name, and we can say photo file size, and now everywhere in the code it'll change that, and we can go ahead and just hold on, let me just get rid of this because I'm tired of it kind of highlighting it. It's driving me nuts. So now, there we go. Now it has saved our changes here. So anyway, so now the photo file size is less than 4,000, or whatever. So yeah, also I think I just, oh yeah, sorry, I just realized it because I was like, why is it saying greater than 4,000? I forgot because I inverted it, so it's saying if it's greater than, then continue. And actually, now that I see this, I probably should change the comment to say if it's greater than, then start the loop over. But I think this comment still makes sense. And this is kind of what I mean about good documentation. You want to write a comment not to say what the code does, but why you're doing it. I think that's more important. Or if your code is kind of confusing and a little more advanced, like if it's like a crazy Lambda function or something, you should probably explain the methodology, like I am using the Lambda function to do this, or I want to do this, right? So I would use it for the hows and the whys. I wouldn't use it for the whats, because anyone can just, like, I don't have to be a genius to realize that this is saying if the photo file size is greater than 4,000, then start the loop over. Of course, if you don't know what the word continue keyword means in Python, I mean, I guess that you might need a little more help, but it's pretty obvious. This is literally 2 lines of code. I don't have to write a whole multi-line comment explaining all of Python just to explain what this code does. I mean, there are a certain level of amount of assumptions you have to make when you're talking about documentation. You kind of have to assume that people know certain things because it's just kind of a pretty standard. Like, yeah, I could write like 20-line comments under each line of code to explain all of Python syntax, and I could explain this is a function and this is the parameter and this is another parameter, and I could explain what an if statement does in Python, and I'm saying if this is not true or false, then continue. I could write a bunch of comments, but it would just be gross and littering all of my code, and it's just you kind of have to make some assumptions. I know that sounds kind of bad because trust me, when I first started writing Python code, I wanted to write it so that anyone who doesn't even know how to code could read my code and understand what's going on. But you do have to make some sacrifices. You just can't do it, especially if you're writing code for professional purposes like a job or for school where your professors are grading it and stuff. Like you kind of have to make assumptions. Like I assume my professor knows more Python than I do, or at least the same amount of Python that I do. I can't necessarily just write my comments as if I'm writing them for a 5-year-old. This isn't explain like I'm 5. This is coding, so I gotta kind of be careful with my comments here. Plus, the other thing about writing comments is you have to go in and edit them if they ever become incorrect. As you've already seen, I've had to change some of my comments and even some of my documentation to further reflect some of the changes that I made. And that can be a pain because, when you have to, it's like it's bad enough to change like lines and lines and lines of code, but then to us also have to go in and change your comments is like kind of sucks. Now, I do want to share one thing verbally to you guys. There are some tools out there that you can use, some plugins for PyCharm and VS Code, I think, as well, and some other editors probably, that you can actually have automatic documentation. So you can go ahead and write a function, and it will just write the documentation for you. And these use things like AI and stuff to figure out what's going on. Of course, the problem with this is that it's not necessarily the most accurate, but it'll at least do like half the work for you, and then you just have to edit what it wrote and just, tailor it more to what the actual scenario is that's going on in your code. But it is available to you if you feel like you're wasting too much time writing documents and code comments all the time. So I do want to make that aware or make you aware of that. But it is a thing. So the other thing I want to talk about is variable names. It's really good to make good variable names. Now, one example I can give is successful post. This is a really good variable name. Now, in this case, it may not always be clear what we're talking about because, I mean, post can mean many things in the terms of networking. It could mean like sending a network request, like a post request. It could be like posting on social media. So maybe it's not the most perfect variable name, but if you look closely at the code around it, it makes sense because this is saying it's a post to Facebook request. So then we pass in the function post to Facebook and we pass in what we're trying to post to Facebook. And then we say, okay, this was the post ID. And I could probably rename this to Facebook post ID, but I think it's just a little bit too redundant here just for my own personal project. But that's another example of a good variable name. If I said Facebook post ID, this might be even more clear as to what it is. But it is what it is. So this is post ID, and just assume that this says Facebook post ID for now. In fact, you know what? I've convinced myself. Let's go ahead and rename that too while we're at it. So we could say Facebook post ID. And then there we go. Now it's renamed. Simple as that. If you ever want to rename variables and you don't feel like changing them in every place in your code, you can do like a control find and replace, or in PyCharm you can just right click whatever variable it is and click refactor and then rename, and then there you go. You can also do Shift F6 as you saw there. I don't think that keybind will change, but it's always good to actually check to see what the actual keybind combination shortcut is. But anyway, so now this is Facebook post ID. So if the Facebook post ID is in the post to Facebook request, the network request that we sent out, then it's a successful post, because that's just how Facebook servers work. If you try to send a network request to post to Facebook servers, they will send back the post ID of that, of the successful post that you made. So if that's in there, then yep, it was a successful post. If it's not, then let's start over. So the good news, the thing I like about my code currently, and this is good and bad, but I want to talk about this for just a quick second and then we'll move on. But in this particular code, one thing I like about the code that I wrote here is that if it finds an image and it wants to post the image, if it doesn't post the image successfully, it will just grab a whole new image. This is good and bad. It's actually bad for more reasons than it's good, but there is a good quality to it. The good news is maybe it found a good image, but for whatever reason, Facebook just won't take it. It has some sort of content scanning and it goes against standards or something or whatever. For whatever reason, Facebook will just not take this image. Maybe there was some parameter that I didn't know about. Maybe the file size was good and the photo resolution was fine, but maybe there's some hidden thing that Facebook just doesn't allow on its platform, so it's just going to grab a new photo. The problem with this wording, though, and I really should add some kind of barrier to this, is that what if some part of Facebook's service is down? What if it does actually post to Facebook, but for whatever reason it doesn't give me back a network response? Or what if my router is blocking the responses? Then it could actually be posting to Facebook, but it's just going to keep endlessly posting to Facebook forever until that finally gets resolved. So I could end up making 10,000 posts in a day and then getting rate limited and maybe even my API key blocked and all kinds of stuff, and getting angry letters from Facebook saying I'm blasting their servers and whatnot. So I probably should add some kind of for I in range 5, try to post 5 times and then stop. But I'll work on that. But I just wanted to share that snippet of code with you as well. Also, one thing I want to talk about real quick is arrow code. And I just want to share this super, super quick. So let me see if I can share this with you guys. And I promise I'll try to make this really quick. But one thing I used to do in my code was called arrow code. And now what you're seeing here, these are called guard clauses. So here's the thing. If you have a piece of code that you're writing, it might make more sense to say okay, variable equals 5. If variable is equal to 5, then also if variable is, I don't know, if is instance variable integer, then do stuff. And I mean, this is a bad code, but the point that I'm making is you could say if this condition is true, then let's go ahead and go to the next if condition. If that's true, then go ahead and go to the next. And this is just bad code. You don't want to do this. Ideally, what you want to do is actually what you want to say. You want to put this in some kind of loop. Now, we're already in a loop, so I don't have to initialize a loop. But let me just show you real quick if we were to do that from scratch. So you could put this in a while loop, and then you could say, or a for loop, whatever you're doing. And then you could say, if variable does not equal 5, if variable does not equal 5, then continue. And then you could just say, okay, and then down here you can say, if not is instance variable int, then continue. And then kind of go from there, right? And so that's what you can do. That's just one thing you can do. Because look how much cleaner that is. You're going from one clause to the next clause to the next clause. You're not going if, you know? So you could see how much cleaner that would be over time. And I just wanted to share that with you guys because it is something that I find to be very, it's a thing I actually learned recently to get out of that habit, and you can actually see it if you go back to my history of versions of things. You can see I have silly, funny commit things, but like let's say, let's just pick this one. Okay, so let's go here and let's say browse files and let's look at my code before. Look at this. Do you see the difference? This is literally the same function. I've also made the function smaller. This is just a really big function. I probably should just make this a lot smaller than what it is, to be honest with you, but it is what it is. So, anyway, but this is the same function. Literally the same function. It ends right here, and it starts right here. Look, it's like all in the same indent. Like, it only indents like 3 levels at most. Look at this. Look at this. This is like, and it gets just ridiculous. Like, this is the end of the, like, you have to scroll. This is ridiculous. It's stupid. And the problem with doing arrow code like this is if you see this line right here, you don't want your code to go over this line. It's like a margin, like on paper. It's not going to give you errors, but it's like you're going to have people have to scroll to get past this line. This is the 120 character line, I'm pretty sure. So when you get past 120 characters on each line, ideally you want to go to the next line. So for example, right here, I typed all the way into the line and then I stopped and I typed here. And notice everything, you don't have to like scroll sideways to read this comment. For example, just real quick, I'll show you what that would look like. So if I do that, now look, there's a scroll bar and I have to scroll to read this. Look how crappy that looks, dude. It's ridiculous. Now look, enter key changes that whole problem for me. And so anyway, the point that I'm making is if you have arrow code, it doesn't matter if your if statement starts way over here, your line still starts from over here. So you can only write up until like this line. This isn't the same line, but just imagine that it is. You can only write your comment from like this point to this point as opposed to from like this point to this point. You know what I mean? So it's just much cleaner to avoid this arrow code. Do you see how different that is? So this is what guard clauses are. So I just want to show you this real quick. So this is the first if statement. If the if the photo is an acceptable extension, meaning it ends in JPEG or PNG or web P or whatever, I think is one of them, and a few others. So if it's one of those extensions, then we're good to go. Now let's go ahead and check that it's in the database. Okay, it's in the database. If it is in the database, then let's check the file size. If the file size is good, let's do this. And this makes logical sense, but it just doesn't look pretty. In this case, what we're doing, notice the difference. First if statement, we're saying if this is true. In this case, we're saying if it's not true, then start the loop over. Okay, now do this. If it's not true, start the loop over. Okay, now do this. If it's not true, start the loop over. If it's not true, start the loop over. This is saying if it is true, go one more indent. If it is true, go one more indent. If it is true, go one more indent. Do you see what I'm saying? Like, you see how the difference of that is? Just much cleaner, much, much cleaner. And it may not make as much sense to you, because I think to me, logically, when you're learning programming, this makes more sense to type out. Like, if this is good, then let's go ahead and move on to the next check on the checklist. And, okay, that's good, then check, you know. I think this makes more logical sense, but it's not necessarily... Sorry, guys. Ugh. Jesus, getting that crud out of me. Ugh. Sorry, guys. Anyway, I think when you're learning to code, this makes more logical sense, but I don't think this is cleaner by any means. I think this is much cleaner, and it's really not that much harder to just invert all your if statements and then just keep going like that. So yeah, anyway, I just wanted to share that. So now let's talk about function names as well. So let's look at this function name. I say get post ID from JSON. Actually, this isn't the function name I want to use. I want to use this one. This is a good example. The image hash is in the database. So look at this. This is the name of my function. All right, so I'm just going to go ahead and copy this so I can control F and see where it's called. So if we go in here, this is where we define the function. Notice we only actually use the function once. This is only where it's used. But say, okay, so if not, image hash is in database. So this just reads in plain English, if the image hash is not in the database, and then I pass in what the image hash, like what the database is that we're looking for, and then the hash string, then continue. So the way this reads is just basically plain English. You don't have to understand code to read what this is saying. If image hashes in database. And if this makes it clearer for you, let me do this. Let me clear this out. And let me just say this. Watch this. I could just say, this is the equivalent of me saying, if image hashes in database equals false. Now, I don't have to do this because I can just say if not, and Python, well, PyCharm specifically prefers me to write it that way, and I think that's also a PEP 8 standard. So it even says this can be simplified. So just say if not, right? But I do want to show you that because I want you guys to see it in plain English. So if the image hash is in the database is false. That means if the image hash is not in the database, because false true would mean that it is in the database, because that's what this function is returning. So this function name is a great function name because it basically just tells me what it returns. Now, I want to show you one more thing about type hinting real quick. So let's go up to the function again, and let's just copy that in there, because I want to go where we define the function. So there's a thing called type hinting that you can show to return what a you can show what a function returns, and I want to find it right here. So this is a documentation example. This is from the website realpython.com. It's not the official documentation, but it is a good example of documentation. And these are another example of doc strings, by the way, that we saw a second ago. So this is where they said the parameter name was x, which, by the way, I don't think that's a very good parameter name, but let's ignore that for now. So the parameter name is x, and x is equal to, you want to pass in a NumPy array when you use x. So that's what the type hint is for. But look at this little arrow here. What this means is this arrow is saying this function returns a float. And you can even see right here, return a float. Of course, they designed it that way so that, you know, it's all pretty like that. But that's, look, so all you got to do is just arrow, and then I want to say bool. It returns a bool, and this is perfectly true. This means that when someone uses this function, so let's say on the next like line down here, if I say image hash is in database, and then I pass in the table here, so, you know, just whatever, and then hash string, right? I don't know. Actually, I shouldn't use that word. Hash s. Then it's going to tell me, which it's going to yell at me, but, you know, it's going to tell me that it returns a bool. Of course, I didn't actually get far enough because I didn't pass anything into it, but basically, when I'm looking at the documentation, I can tell that this returns a bool. And so you want to use these little arrows if you can. I mean, again, these are small little things, but they will go a long way. Especially, like, I know we already said returns true or false down here technically, but it's just more clear here. Like, I could even just completely remove this line and it doesn't matter, but I want to keep that line because I want to say why it returns true. This is where I think the returns thing is really important, because true, it says it returns true if the image hash is in the database. Now, even that I think is redundant because that's what the whole name of the function is. But you can see how amazing writing a good function name and a good variable names is so important. Like, it's just so important. Now, to be honest, table I don't think is the best parameter name because it doesn't really tell me what it is. And I didn't even like put a type hint as to what table is, so I should probably go back and change that. Like I said, I've learned a lot since I first wrote this code. Even the most recent changes I've made, I've learned a lot about documentation now, but you can see there are things that even I wasn't doing when I wrote this code, but I just wanted to share these things with you. And so anyway, so table just represents a database table from a SQL table. Specifically, we're using SQLite 3 in this code. So maybe it might not be the same in other versions of SQL and Python and whatnot, but I should probably be more specific as to what table is, and I should probably say it references a SQLite data table. And, you know, I can come back to this and we can edit this, but I did at least want to show you the, like, returns thing here because I think it is really important. So, anyway, I do like the name of this function name, though, because it is very specific. It says if the image hash is in the database. So is it in the database or not? That's pretty specific. And it tells you, it basically tells you, and you could say is in the database. That in and of itself kind of tells you if it's going to be true or false. Because, I mean, image hash is in the database. Do you think, like, just ignore that you even see these lines of code. Just look at the name of the function itself. Just don't even care about what this says all down here. Because you can see it says return true or false. But think about it this way. If you read this function name, if I gave you just this, and you just looked at this, what would you think this returns? It's not going to return an integer. Is the image hash in the database? That's a yes or no question. If I asked you that in plain English, if I came to you to your desk and I said, "Hey Johnny," or whatever your name is the image hash in the database? You would say yes or no. It's either in there or it's not in there. There's no like in between. I mean, maybe if someone's working on it, I guess that would be some kind of quantum, like, you know, Schrodinger's cat example of, well, it's being added to the database, so it's not technically in there right now, but it is being added literally as we speak. So I guess that's kind of like a between 0 and 1 sort of state. But, it's basically it's either in there or it's not. Even in that example, it's still technically not in the database as of writing it right now. Or as of me asking you. So that's a yes or no. And we know that all yes or no questions are basically just true or false in Python. That's pretty straightforward. So that's a good example of, if something's in the database. I also want to talk about F strings real quick, and then we'll move on to PEP 8 standards. So F strings are a really good way to format your code and make it look all pretty, since we're on the topic of pretty code. So look at this. I'm going to say word is equal to, wait, no. Actually, that's fine. Word is equal to stuff, right? And I want to say, actually, no. I want to say example string is equal to word, right? That's a better example. So example string is equal to word. Now, what most beginner Python people will do is they will say print this is a, and then they will put a space, and then in the string literal there with the quote, and then they'll put a plus sign, and then they'll say example string. And so if you print that out, of course I'm not going to print this here because it'll print it actually in the, I don't want to run this code because then it'll post a thing to Facebook. But let me show you here. If I go to my interpretive shell and I do that and I run this, it'll say this is a word, right? So what if I do the same thing, but instead of adding the plus, this is called concatenating strings, by the way, when you add a plus for a string to another string. Now, what if I do this? What if I say comma? Because print can take multiple arguments. If you put a comma between things, it actually prints the exact same thing. And I don't have to define the example string every single time I do that. That's kind of redundant. But here's something you can do, though. Let me show you something really cool. There's a thing in Python as of like 3.6 or something where you can do F strings. So all you gotta do is you gotta put a little F in here, and you put a little, you put your quotes in there. And I'm not using an editor, so I have to be kind of like, I kind of have to hard code everything. But I could say this is a, and then what you do, if you want to insert your variable in there, you put some brackets in there, and inside your bracket you put the name of the variable. And now watch what happens. It's the same exact thing, but now when someone's reading your print statement, and this isn't, I'm just printing it. You could do this on any string in Python. I'll show you that in a second. But this just literally reads exactly how you would read it in plain English. Print, this is a example string. Oh, let's go look up what example string is. Oh, it's word. Okay, this is a word. Like, look how simple that is. I know the comma kind of looks similar, and maybe to some degree it might look cleaner to you, but imagine if you had to pass in like 10 different variables in here. Like, I could I'm not going to sit here and do it because it would take like, a couple minutes to like write out that whole multi-line print statement and everything. But the point is, like, you could define a whole crap ton of variable names in here, and then you could basically write like a Mad Lib story, for example, that references all those variable names. And you could just put an F string, and you could just say, like, for example, F, like, just pretend I'm writing like a print statement that has all the stuff in there. You could just say F this first variable went to the second variable and then went to the third variable. Look how much cleaner that is than doing this. I probably should have actually just kept that line of code now that I think about it. So let's just do this. Well, it's going to yell at me because those aren't defined. So yeah, let's just go ahead and clear it out then in that case. Oops, sorry guys. Let's just do that. But anyway, I want you to keep that in your mind for a second, and pause and rewind the video or take a screenshot if you have to. And then look at this. Watch this. If I say the same thing, I don't remember the exact wording, but something like this. Wait, I have to put quotes. Sorry. This, and then I have to put a space, and then I put a plus, and then I put first variable plus space went to the, and then I have to put a space and then a quote to end it, and then a plus, and then I have to put second variable. And like, you see what I mean? Like, you have to keep like breaking up the sentence just so you can add these pluses, and then like I can kind of make out what this is saying. Like, this first variable went to the second variable. Like, if, but because I'm really practiced in reading Python code, but first, oh, and I never, finished my print statement because, whatever. But anyway, for someone who like is new to Python, I mean, even if you just change these pluses to commas, it still doesn't really help the readability that much, I think. So you can see how clean the F strings are compared to concatenating strings, especially when you have, like, if you just have one variable in there, I don't know, maybe a comma or something is better. I don't know, but I personally prefer F strings. I think they're just so so pretty and so easy. You literally just put an F before the quotes and then just put some brackets and then put your variable inside the brackets. It's so freaking simple. A child could do it. And you can even do it in like other things like return. Like if you're returning a string and you're saying this function passed the test, like if you wanted to return, or I don't know, if you wanted to return a string that says good to go, like maybe that's the end of your function and that's how you know that the function did what it was supposed to do. It just as a, I don't know, kind of a silly way to do it. Well, actually, let me not do that. Let me just say, like, hold on, I'll give you a better example. I'm sorry if this is like kind of all over the place. I'm just trying to think of the best, easiest way to show you guys this stuff. But if I just say like def example function, and then I pass in string variable, right? And then I say, oh goodness. Okay, well, we're not going to do this in the thing, but okay, just imagine a function like this, okay? I'll just type it out in PyCharm because it's easier for me to do it this way. But I could just say def example function, and then we give it a word, and then it has to be a type of string, and it returns a string, right? Now, see, we're using our documentation. We're going to skip using the docstring for now because I want to show this real quick. But you could say return, and then you could put an F, and you could put a string here, little quotes, and you could say the returned, or no, the word that was passed in was word. Simple as that. You can do F strings in any string in Python. It doesn't matter. Wherever you put a string literal in Python, just put that cute little F there and then slap those bad boys in. It's so simple to use. And of course, it's going to yell at me because the reason this is yelling at me right now is because of documentation and PEP8 standards. So look, it's not an actual problem with the function. It's just the PEP8 standards. Now, I'm actually going to talk about PEP8 standards. So, I'm not going to go over every single PEP8 standard because there's literally entire freaking documentation about this stuff and whole books written about writing clean documentation code. But I want to show you because I don't think VS Code has this. I've looked for it. I may just can't find it. I don't use VS Code that much, so it could just be me. But PyCharm has this amazing feature where, excuse me, PyCharm has this amazing feature where it will actually highlight PEP8 for you. So, for example, one of the PEP8 rules is that if you're not inside of a class, every space between another function needs to be 2 spaces. So, for example, if I remove a space here, it'll start highlighting this, and it'll say, hey, I expected 2 blank lines and I found 1. And now, if we go over here to our errors here, you can ignore these errors because this is just me not installing the modules, and I don't have the config on my local computer. This is a module I created, but this is just, you can ignore this. Is basically just I just haven't installed the modules to run this file, and I don't care about that because I don't want to run this on my own computer. I usually run this on a Raspberry Pi. That's on my network. I don't run this on my own computer. I edit it on my own computer, but I don't run it in this environment. So don't worry about all these errors. But PyCharm will tell you that you haven't installed, like you haven't done pip install Facebook here, for example. So that's why it's saying no module named that. But anyway, you can ignore these errors for now. But this is the one I want to show you. It says PEP8. It says expected 2 lines, found 1. So what you can do is you can click on this and it'll highlight the exact line. And so you can see if I just add another line here, it fixes that. But what if I didn't know what that means? What if I'm like expected 2 lines? What are you talking about? If I right click and I say show context actions here, I can click reformat the file. Or I can actually do that here. I can say show quick fixes, reformat the file, and then boom, it does that for me. Now actually, when you click reformat the file, it'll actually do multiple changes at once. It'll basically change all of your Python file to support PEP8 standards. So for example, I have 3 of those errors here, but when I do it here, it fixes all 3. Now, here's another quick PEP8 error that you might run into a lot. If you don't put spaces between your equal signs, which is a very common thing I see among a lot of beginner programmers in Python. And by the way, I think it's just, I'm not trying to like be mean. It drives me freaking insane, my OCD, when I see people who don't space out their equal signs. So anyway, another example is you can do right here, you can do quick fixes, reformat the file, boom, it fixes it for you. Now, I don't want you to rely on this because I want you to at least see what the error is. I would encourage you to try to write your code perfectly, like as you go in terms of PEP8 standards. So every time I write a new function, I don't want to come down here and say def function stuff and then, well, I don't know, return stuff. The most simplest function you can write. I don't want you to get in the habit of doing this and just reform and just, oh, okay, let's just reformat. I don't want you to get in the habit of doing that because I want you to see what it's doing and why you have to do it. Because in a real programming job, like if you got hired to be a programmer, you'd probably just use a linter, and a linter is the thing that will it's basically like where I clicked right click and format. It's basically, it'll do that for you every time you run your Python code. So you can write your code as sloppy as you want in terms of the equal signs and the spaces and all the other like maybe also one of the PEP8 standards is if a line is too long. So for example, if I make this line too long, it'll yell at me. Now I think it actually like takes some time to like pop up that one, or maybe I ignored that one or something. I can't remember why. But anyway, that is one of the possible things that PEP8 standard says. PEP8 standard says that your line shouldn't be X amount of characters long. I think it used to be 80 characters and now it's 120 or something. Because, you know, people have bigger screens now and it's not the freaking 70s where we're working on tiny little CRT monitors doing Windows DOS or whatever. But anyway, so um, that's kind of my point though, is like that's one of the standards of PEP8 is, you know, all your spacing, the length of your lines, and your equal sign spacing, and how many spaces you have. Also, if you ever do class oriented, like object oriented programming with classes, for example, in unit testing, all your methods have to be 1 space apart, not 2, which is an interesting PEP8 standard because all your functions normally are usually 2 spaces apart, but methods have to be 1 space apart. If you notice, it's yelling at me because I have the opposite problem. I have only 1 line and I have 2 lines and there's only supposed to be 1. So anyway, so PyCharm will also yell at you if you just use bad grammar, like here, and that boom fixes that error. But I want you to be careful, like watching these like errors that pop up right up here. If you're using PyCharm, you can click here, it'll open this little window, and it'll tell you. And some of these errors are actually really important, like hey, you referenced a variable that's not assigned yet or something, and that's gonna cause a break in your code. And if you click on that, it'll go to that variable name, and you can see like, oh, I haven't defined this variable yet, or maybe I said like, for example, quickly I could just say like x is equal to y plus 5, and then that's a PEP8 error right there. And then I could say y equals 5. So x is equal to 10, but x isn't actually equal crap because I didn't define what y is until this line, and you can see unresolved reference y, and then the expected 2 lines error, which is because of this, and so if I just add that, fixes that one. But this is the error I was talking about versus unresolved reference, and that's what that means is, hey, you reference something that doesn't exist. Because if you just like take your hand and block this line of code down, and you're just looking at this line of code up, you could see if you look at everything above, I never reference what y is until this line. So that's I want you to get used to looking at those warning pages, unless it's stuff like this and you can just like ignore it. But I do want you to get used to looking at these warnings, and especially if you're in PyCharm, PyCharm will automatically highlight PEP8 standards for you. Again, I can show you, like here, notice now it'll pop up in the warning right here, PEP8. And so you can choose to ignore these errors if you just really don't care, or if you have a linter or whatever. But yeah. So anyway, I choose to not ignore them because I'm really OCD about my code and I like it to be pretty. So yeah. Anyway, so that's how you write pretty code. You want to make sure you document everything well by using documents. You don't want to litter your code with comments on every single line. You want to make sure your code is spaced out. Another thing I would recommend about spacing is I would add an extra line of your code to different areas of your code. Like, think about writing an essay, for example. If you're writing an essay, you want to stop a paragraph and then start a new paragraph where you're talking about something else, right? So similarly, you can have multiple things in your code in a single function. Like, for example, I'm trying to find a good example of when to do this. So like right here, this block of code is just me defining what all the photo like object attributes are and what their formats are and stuff like that. And I even added my own photo attributes, sort of, so to speak. Not exactly the same thing, but I added my own sort of photo variables here. And then after that, I put a space, and then I started doing all my if statements. So this is like its own little paragraph. This is me doing my paragraph of things, and some of these are redundant. Like I could just do string. I don't necessarily have to say photo ID equals string photo ID. I could just pass in that everywhere, but I don't know. Some of the stuff is redundant, and it is what it is. And some of the stuff you're probably thinking like, why did you just define photo permalink if you can just do photo.url? In this case, it was more of a design choice. I just want to make more clear what photo permalink is. And the permalink, if you don't know, is a terminology used where, for example, if you find a Reddit post, like, let's just go to Reddit real quick. I'll just show you. If you go to Reddit and you pick an image, like this image, I'm just picking the first one I see. This link to this post right here, well, this is the link to like the whole comment thread and everything, but this link to this post is the permalink. This is how you would get to the entire post. But if you just want the image is if you like open the image in a new tab. This is like the image link. So in this example, what I'm actually referencing is this is the photo original, this page, and this is the photo permalink, this page. So in Pexels terminology, this would actually get me to the Pexels post. And so it would be like a Reddit post, but it would be Pexels, and it would show the image and all that. And so this is kind of like what I mean. But anyway, I just wanted to share that. That's the last thing I wanted to share. I was trying to make a quick video, but it ended up being like an hour long. But I had a lot of things to cover. So yeah, just a quick recap. Just use your doc strings. Make sure to use your type hinting in each string, which I don't actually do here, which is funny. I recently started doing it, so I haven't actually updated this code to really do it. But yeah, make sure you use type hinting like you can see here. Just describe, put a little colon after each. And if you have multiple parameters, you could just say like URL is a string, and then the file name is a string, and then what does this return? This returns a string. And that's an example of type hinting. You've said what you return, and you've said that these are strings, and these are strings. Very handy, because if I'm typing in a URL, I mean, obviously a URL is going to be a string. That's pretty obvious. But, and the file name is obviously going to be a string. But like a sentence, for example, this is a great example, because this isn't a string. This is actually a list of strings. So this might be confusing. And this is probably confusing on my part. I probably should have renamed this parameter to be more obvious as to what it is. But that's kind of what I mean. If you write good code with good parameter names, good variable names, good function names, your code basically comments itself. I don't need to write as much in my documentation or comments to explain what it's doing. It's pretty obvious what it's doing if you write good comments, or sorry, good variable names, good class names, good function names, good parameter names and things like that. So just be really, really, really good, and do not use, one last final tip I'm going to say, do not, I repeat, under any circumstances, do not use abbreviations for your variable names or function names or whatever, unless the only exception to this rule is if you are using an abbreviation that is very, very, very commonly understood in your specific industry that this code is being deployed in. So, for example, if you are a game developer and you abbreviate hit points to HP, that's pretty obvious to game developers what HP means, right? And maybe gamers and stuff. But for like HP in like a medical environment or like a finance environment, or I mean, I can't really imagine why you'd use hit points in any other circumstance. But the point is, if you use HP somewhere else, they could think like Harry Potter or something. Like, what does this mean? Like, that nobody knows what HP means other than that context, right? So don't just say like, don't just use crappy variable names that are abbreviated, especially if it's an abbreviation for like a company name or something. Just just use good variable names. I don't care if it takes you 3 times as long to write out, because look how easy it is. Watch this. If I say hit points is 10, and then I say new, let's just say HP plus 5 is equal to, look, I typed the letter H and I could just hit enter. It doesn't matter if your variable name is long, because whether I made that HP or H, watch, I'll just go ahead and change this to HP. Watch this. HP, right? So now, well, it's going to be confusing because I have this, so let me just call it hit P for, it's going to look weird, but bear with me here. So now, if I just type H, boom, like, it's the same amount of time. I literally just hit H and enter. It's that freaking simple. So don't feel bad that your variable names are super long and that you have to type them out. I don't want to hear any complaints here, because you literally just type H and then it's good. Like, it already knows what you're referencing. Especially PyCharm is really smart enough to know that if you define a variable name on the next line above, and then it's like, I know you're going to want to use that variable name immediately after you just defined it. So PyCharm is pretty good about that, especially if you have like AI helping you write code, like Copilot or something. It's even better about this. So I don't want to hear any complaints about writing long variable names to make them descriptive. It's really like, whatever, because it just takes like 2 seconds to write all this crap out. But anyway, so, and by the way, just because it takes longer to write out hit points, you know, I think it's, when you type out your variable names really long, it's going to save someone else hours of time reading your code as opposed to trying to figure out what the heck HP means. So it's good to write long variable names, because the amount of time it takes you to write those variable names is nothing compared to the amount of time you've just saved someone else from understanding what the heck your variable names mean. So anyway, that's my final point on variable names, function names, class names, all that stuff. So I'm going to leave it there. I'm going to end this video here, but otherwise, if you guys have any questions, just let me know and we'll talk about it later. Okay. All right, we'll see you guys later. Bye.